Welcome to the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast, sponsored by Dominion Enterprise Services. I'm Catherine Tindall, CPA and founder of Dominion. We're a tax and accounting firm focused exclusively on serving advisors for their own tax planning and filing needs as business owners. At Dominion, we work alongside advisory firm owners to bring proactive strategy, clarity, and confidence to their tax planning so they can focus on growing their firms. The focus of this show is to cover different areas that I've experienced as a tax planner, working with advisor clients in their lives, building their practices. So let's get started. Hello, everybody. This is Catherine, and on today's episode, I have with me a very special guest, Kristin Burke. She is a leadership and execution partner who works with financial advisors and leaders as they build and scale their financial services firms. Since 2009, she has coached and developed financial advisors and leaders, beginning within a Fortune 200 financial services firm and now through her own consulting practice. She also hosts the Elite Achievement podcast. So hopefully that means we're going to have a good experience today with the conversation. But welcome to the show, Kristin. I appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Catherine, thank you so much for having me. I am looking forward to this conversation.
So I think we have, it's always an interesting place where our worlds collide with, seeing firm owners make the transition to like you're advisor number one, you're in all of the client relationships, you're the one that's been building up the book, and then kind of having to start delegating things, transitioning where it's, I did a presentation the other day to a group, an RIA group, talking about how basically you wear two hats, right? Like you've got an investor hat and then you've got an employee hat. And for those, very early beginning years, right? Like you're just in the employee hat. We're surviving, we're starting from scratch, or, if you've purchased a practice from somebody else, like you're trying to kind of fix things and that sort of piece. So what are some things that advisors should be thinking about as they're starting to make that transition? I think the initial pain point here is usually around you've been spinning all of the plates, and how do we transition some of those plates to others? What's some of the framework that you like to work with for advisors that are kind of at that inflection point in the career?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's about recognizing the skills that make advisors great as an advisor aren't always the same skills that make them a great leader. So, for example, a lot of times as an advisor, you have this skill around urgency. You want to be urgent, get your clients to take action, urgent with your follow-up. And that doesn't always translate into leading others. So especially if you're leading another advisor on your team, you sometimes need to slow down as you're coaching and as you're developing. I think a lot of times advisors are like, well, just do it the way that I've always done it. And that doesn't always translate as you're coaching and developing others. And then especially, Catherine, you were starting to allude to the topic of delegation. And I think this is one of the most difficult skill sets for an advisor to learn, because it's more than a skill, it's actually an identity shift. Because if you think about it, as an advisor, a lot of your identity is wrapped up in the value in what you can do, the value you bring to your clients, the value of the production or the AUM that you're bringing over. But when you start stepping into that leader role and you start delegating, your value is really in what you build. And so that's a big shift, and it can be uncomfortable for advisors.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, when I have these conversations, obviously at a more casual level, because we don't, really do formal coaching, but a lot of the conversation I have with people revolves around, I'm looking at this business as an external person to you. I'm seeing your financials. We're talking about what's going on. I see this thing as an asset. That's the way that my mind works. It's like you're building this machine that's producing certain outcomes for yourself, for your clients, for your staff. And it's an asset, and that's the way I see it. And I think for a lot of advisors, them making that transition into this thing has a life of its own that I'm stewarding is a very different relationship than what they're originally used to. Like that there's an intangible value that they've been building with the client relationships and, the AUM that they've brought in and the workflows they've set up and the team members that they've trained up. Like there's just all this massive intangible value that they've been building over time. That's not, it's hard to quantify, but they've already been doing this. But I think, like you said, actually making the identity shift of realizing that that is the primary thing that you're doing, can be, and maybe that's not everybody. I know there's a lot of people that have kind of lifestyle practices. They want to stay at that technician role, but just make it a good flow. And I don't have anything. We have a lot of clients that are in that position, and maybe it's a little bit different. But for the firm owners who kind of aren't in that bucket, what are some maybe practical tips or scenarios or things that you've seen when people are really trying to in earnest make this transition and start to really delegate things?
Yeah. So the first thing you have to think about is it is going to be an investment of time. That's one of the pieces of pushback I get right away is I know I should delegate this. I want to delegate it, but I don't have time. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's unpack that. What does that actually mean? So I think one of the thoughts is it's not as complicated as it needs to be. So if you hire someone and you're going to delegate, you could just have them sit next to you all day for one day and take notes on all the things you do and then report back to you. Here are the things I think I could take off your plate. So that doesn't require a lot of a prep on your end. So I think that's one is just letting go of that limiting belief that it's going to take a lot of time. And because it is going to be an investment, but it's going to save you a ton of time on the back end. The other thing though, and I think this is really what is more complicated, and it might prompt an advisor to say, I don't have time, is if they start delegating a bunch of these things they did that filled up their time, now what are they going to do? So they almost have to think about rewriting their job description and their role. Like, what is their role going to be now if they start delegating a lot of these things away? And sometimes that means that they're going to need to be more focused on client building, which, that evokes a lot of emotion. And it's more fun to fill out paperwork than to ask for referrals. Or sometimes that also means maybe that they're going to need to be in leadership conversations instead of doing all the minutia work. And that then brings up these emotions of, oh my gosh, am I a good leader? And how do I lead? And so I think that, again, there's that identity piece that comes into play that they need to work through.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective, and I and it's so unique to the individual, right? Like what's one person's hard is another person's easy. Something that I notice, especially across the different firm owners that we work with, is like personalities just make such a big difference with the way that you're going to climb this mountain. It's like,
yes,
it really changes it. And so there really isn't like a one size fits all. The other thing too that I've noticed just in experience is, when I see an advisor and then they start to think about who they're going to bring in as a second command or, bring in as a junior or stuff like that. Like you really do need to get a dovetailing between the personality types, like between those two people. And that can be a really hard thing to hit. I guess when people are starting to think about the delegation, like that's a great, ride along strategy is great, for people who can use it where it's not a compliance issue. Like there's a lot of tools out there like Loom and things where you can record yourselves doing things. Like we utilize that a lot internally ourselves, and even for our clients. But I know a lot of people have regulatory issues around stuff like that. When, you bring somebody in, maybe if you could speak a little bit around, okay, you've got somebody who wants to be doing delegation, but like, how do you actually identify the right person to delegate to? Or, when it makes sense to bring in somebody, like at what level do you bring in somebody? Kind of more mechanically, how are you working through that process? Catherine here. Just wanted to say thanks for tuning into the show and hope you've been enjoying it. Since we're all at the mercy of social media algorithms, if you wouldn't mind rating the podcast on whatever platform that you listen to, I'd really appreciate it. And also, if you're looking to stay in the loop on current tax updates, what the firm is working on, and just the things that I think you as a firm owner need to be aware of when it comes to the world of tax, you can sign up for our newsletter using the link below. I only send out editions when we have really useful things to share or things that I think are important to have your attention and energy on. So let's get back to the show, and thanks again for being a listener.
I think one thought is if someone can do a task about 85% of the way that you can do it, you might be able to delegate it. And some of the easiest tasks to delegate, Catherine, are those that are repeatable and they're consistent. You're almost kind of doing it the same way every time. There's not a lot of variability. And then those are some of the early tasks to start to delegate. But I think that there's a difference between administrative task and revenue generating task. And I think that those sometimes, right, require a different hire or a different person. And so what I've seen in my experience is a lot of times advisors will hire for the administrative role first and start getting some of that work off of their plate. But then as they start, building out a bigger vision, and if they do have a vision to really build a firm, they are going to eventually need to start hiring people to drive that revenue. And that becomes a different conversation, because now we start getting into the emotion of, well, I've worked with this client for a really long time, and what are they going to think if someone else comes in and starts working with them? Yeah. And then there's the component I found is that sometimes leaders delegate revenue tasks way too early. They think, ooh, I brought this advisor onto the team. They're going to go out and do business development and sell, but they kind of forget they're going to need the same level of development that advisor needed to get to that level of being comfortable with selling. And so they start to delegate that away too early without a plan around development.
Yeah, no, I've actually had several clients where that happened. They brought in somebody, they were like, great, they're going to go chase and bring in new revenue. I'm going to cut them loose and let them do it. And then they didn't, a couple months later, they're like, oh, this person didn't work out. And it's interesting because I think for a lot of firm owners, especially like you're so used to being able to work autonomously, and work independently. And that's a rare trait. That's not something that everybody has. And, just getting the accountability in place, and then also the support for people to actually be trained up to do it. Because, to really be at the level where you've been spinning all of the plates and keeping everything running is a unique skill set it's hard to duplicate. So I think, something else maybe as part of this conversation with developing staff internally as you're kind of shifting and building out more. Can we talk a little bit about kind of like the governance structure of how those relationships work, like with meetings, or like how do you normally recommend advisors, making sure that they're actually running the support and the relationship correctly for these these people that they're trying to delegate to?
Well, I think at the simplest level, they need to keep the meetings. A lot of times. Let's just start there.
Let's push it to next month. Yeah.
Yes. And of course, your team member probably isn't going to have the courage to say, no, I actually need to meet with you now. And so I think that's another shift, right? When you're a great advisor, a great producer, you're focused on activity and client meetings and back to back. And so I think sometimes you default to that, and a client calls in, there's an emergency, and you think, oh, I got to cancel my one-on-one with my team member. And in my experience, that leads to more problems down the road. Now, there might be times where you need to shift the time of it or shift the day of the week. And I think what's important is you have that conversation with your team member up front, and you ask them, is it more important to you that we meet regularly or that we meet on the same day at the same time? Because what can happen is if you're constantly changing that meeting around, it might create doubt in their mind about the value that they bring on your team. And that's likely not what you're trying to do. So I think get that clarity. Then it's about disciplining yourself to keep that actual meeting and know that if you're running a productive one-on-one meeting with a team member, it's going to save you a ton of time on the back end.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think just as a business owner in general, I've become a big proponent of calendar blocking and just really proactive. Like, I live and die by my calendar. Unless somebody's got an IRS agent at the door, we got to stick to the plan kind of a thing. I think the other, I don't know where I heard this, but I loved this little snippet somebody said is you got to treat your team like they're your A client. Like, just treat them as if you would treat an A client. Would you cancel a meeting on an A client? No. Would you, would you not prepare for that meeting for the A client? No. Like, treat your team like the A client, because it's, you're making, for a lot of these roles, like, you're making a 6-figure investment into this person every year. they are an A client, like they're an A level, investment that you're making. And so treat it like that and show up. I don't remember where I got that from. Like it was probably from some other podcast, but I was like, oh, that's so true. Like it really is. So I guess, when conducting one-on-one meetings, because I think for most business owners in general, meetings can be the bane of our existence if they're not efficient. What's some advice that you have around like how to actually structure those meetings, how frequently those should be happening? Maybe some guidelines on like how to stay, how to actually make them genuinely productive and keep things moving forward.
I think this is a great question. And so I recommend a weekly one-on-one with most of your team members. Some might require a little bit of a different frequency. But I think what you need to do as a leader is you need to step back and ask yourself, what is the information I need from this team member that is going to make this meeting effective? Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of times we come in and there's not clarity on who's actually running the meeting, who's responsible for the agenda. So one of the things I do is I delegate the agenda to my team members. So they're the ones that own it because it's their meeting. It's their meeting to get their questions answered. It's their meeting to make sure they're working on what I think is the most important priority. Because let's face it, sometimes I tell them one thing and then a new idea comes up and then another new idea and they're feeling confused. They've got 8 priorities. And so this is really a great time for us to clarify what's the most important work for them to be doing. But this is also a really great time for me to delegate new projects. So going back to the topic we were talking about, I don't have time to delegate. Well, if you've got a consistent one-on-one and your updates are dialed in, you then can have the time to delegate and talk through new projects that your team can work on. And this also has been a big change in my world, is using this time for approvals. So if there are things that the team is working on and they need my eyes or they want my feedback, it's due at that one-on-one so we can review it right then and there, and it's not creating more work for me outside of that one-on-one. So get clear on the info you need and then think about what's going to make that time really effective for you and your team.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. And then, something that's a little side thing that we do internally that I've loved, is like we use Slack for internal communication, but everybody's got something. And basically every day people will post an async, like these are the top 3 things I'm working on today. And so, oftentimes, like most of the time it's totally spot on. Sometimes somebody will post something and it's like, oh, actually I have this other, like this 4th thing on your list that you thought was less important is actually like number 2 today.
Right.
And that way you're not actually having to do a meeting. It takes like a minute to review that in the morning. And then you just know, okay, yeah, like we're making progress here. So I guess, one of the other questions when it comes to like that meeting cadence and structure, how have you found advisors, be successful in terms of having accountability for people on the team and like how you're measuring performance of people? Because, one of the things I see just looking at people's financials, of places where we can have inefficiency, labor efficiency is a huge like bleed point, on a P&L for a business. Most of the time when I see issues where, we look at the revenue per full-time equivalent, it's usually a pricing issue and it's a revenue issue. But sometimes it's actually a team efficiency and accountability and, it's a labor efficiency issue. So when we're looking more on like that level and how do you zoom into the, this is me at the macro looking at financials, get into the micro of, well, okay, you've got like 3 juniors underneath you. What are good ways that, those people should be getting measured and being held accountable? Like any recommendations you have when it comes to, actual measurability of performance kind of things?
Yeah, I think this is such an important topic. And Catherine, I think it goes back to clarity from the beginning when you hire these juniors or these team members. And do you have the role? Is it clearly defined? Are the responsibilities clearly defined? And have you thought through what are the results? Like what results do I need to see to make this investment worth it to me? And most people have not done that level of work, right? And that's where they can partner with someone like you and they can crunch some numbers and you can help give them some clarity around, okay, if you're spending X, this is what this person needs to bring in and produce to, break even. And, here's where you start to see growth and a profit. So I think it starts there. And then it's about when you have this person on the team, have you had the conversation with them around what success looks like in their role? And I think success is going to have different metrics. I always think about there's a 30-day success mark. Like, what do you want this person to have mastered in their first 30 days with you on the team? And that could look very different than what you want them to have mastered in 6 months in their first year. And so just thinking about those success metrics are really helpful, because once that's clear, then you can think about the KPIs or the OKRs or the leading indicators, whatever system you like to use that are going to get you to that success. Because I think a lot of times advisors measure the result or they measure the output without measuring the input or what goes into getting that result. And that's where the accountability piece is so important, is because if you're very clear on this is what this person needs to deliver, these are the results, this is the AUM, this is the production, and then what does it take, right? Are they having 5 client meetings a week? Are they generating 10 referrals a week? Are they going to make 100 calls a week? Whatever it is that you define, once that's clear, then you can go to work on holding them accountable.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And, I think that really making that distinction between the lead metric, like the input and the output, and, really focusing on, like, if you can get them to be consistent with the input and you're not getting the output that you want, okay, there's a process problem here, right? And then we can solve for that. But until you actually have some data and measurability around those things, I found very often, like when it's funny, like I'll talk to advisors and, ask some detailed questions about things to get a sense of this. And a lot of the business decision making, because it doesn't come from a data perspective, it will be a lot of vibes based, kind of like, we're going to go do this because I feel like this is going to go this way. And it's like, well, intuition is powerful, and I'm a big proponent of, like, you do really need to lead into that. Your gut usually is trustworthy, but, for a lot of the decisions around these, specifically in the micro mechanics of things, having actual data. And then also it doesn't make you the bad guy, right? Like if you've got a team member who's underperforming, it's like, it's just the numbers. Like it is what it is. It's not a vibes based, takedown kind of thing.
For sure. Well, yeah. And if you can combine intuition with data, I mean, imagine how much more powerful that's going to be. And one of the things I love about data and tracking, especially as you're holding people accountable, is we can figure out, is it an effort or an effectiveness issue, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're putting in enough inputs, okay, what do we need to do as a leader to coach them? Is it language? Is it their follow-up? Is it, right? Those are the coaching conversations. But if we're not even putting in enough inputs, now we got to talk about, right, the effort. So what's getting in the way of you doing that activity? And a lot of times those conversations, there are a lot of belief conversations. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of mindset. And those might not be things that advisors feel equipped to do or equipped to have. And that's where I would just encourage them to get good at asking questions, because I think a lot of times advisors want to go in and they want to solve, right? They want to solve the problem, right? They're problem solvers, right? They take clients' complex financial data and they want to solve it, and they want to do the same as they're holding others accountable in their coaching. But there is that art of just slowing down and, well, tell me more about that. And how did this happen this way? And how did we arrive at this? And they don't always slow down and ask those questions.
Yeah. And it's funny. It reminds me of a piece of advice I got from a business coach one time, which was, you got to learn how to delegate critical thinking too. And that is really, really difficult because you do want to just go in and solve for them. And a lot of times people will bring you their monkeys, right? Like, you've got a staff member, especially on a one-on-one, they've got a problem. You see the solution to it, but actually training them to find the solution themselves. Or, like something that I've implemented is the, if there's a problem that's coming up, it's like, okay, great. What are 3 solutions for this? And then let them give you 3 solutions. Okay, of the 3, which one do you like the best and why? Mm-hmm. All right, this one. What do you think is not going to work about this? And then, whatever they say. Okay, what's the downside if you're wrong? Like this, whatever. And then, okay, that sounds good. Let's just do that. But just giving them the empowerment to kind of work through the options. You don't lose complete control, And then also just even things like when you do go to delegation, having a lot of, a lot of clarity around where am I okay with you just making a call and executing versus where do I need to be looped in? Is that a certain threshold? Is it a certain topic? Is whatever, right? And so building that in, I know it's funny, like something that we utilize a lot internally just because we're tax professionals is checklists. And a lot of that kind of thing is in our checklist of just like, if the situation comes up, you need to like bring in this person or, things like that. And I think for a lot of the, delegation piece, that's another, big component of it is like, where do you start and where do you stop? What are they responsible for thinking about versus what are you going to take responsibility for thinking about, or where do decisions get made is, that kind of thing. So for people who are interested in learning more about you, Kristin, can you describe a little bit how you work with firms and maybe some of the, the resources or things that you've got out there for
Sure.
people to learn more?
Yeah, Catherine, I love being a leadership and execution partner for firms. And so what that means is I'm oftentimes working with the founder or the partner or the leader of the firm. And my job is to help them execute on their vision. So we have big visions, big growth strategy, and then I come in and figure out what are some of the bottlenecks, what are some of the challenges, what's getting in your way of being able to execute. And sometimes they just need a place to think. They need someone to challenge their thinking, ask them the right questions. They need a sounding board. Other times we need to build out a strategy. Other times it's about accountability, right? Let's be honest. A lot of times our firm leaders and our advisors, they need accountability themselves. And so that's where I like coming in as a partner to help them build out the firm that they want to build out. And in terms of resources, you can find me at kristinburke.com. You can also check out my podcast, which is called Elite Achievement. So a lot of great episodes and content on my podcast. Reminds me of an episode I did recently, Catherine, with a CEO who talked about a decision matrix. And she found she was the bottleneck in her organization and needed to create a matrix. And so if the decision is reversible or not reversible and where it falls on the consequence scale, that allowed her team to know, okay, hey, if this is reversible and it's not that consequential, I can probably make the decision, such as she used the example, the coffee in the break room. And so I encourage you, right? Like that one, she does not need to decide that what goes in there.
Yeah.
So if your listeners,
I know we even have a policy
more,
where, for people on my team where it's like, if it's under $500 and you think it's going to be a good idea, just do it. Like, I don't care.
Right.
I trust you. If it backfires, tell me about it and we won't do it again. But like, don't even send me an email. Yeah. Cause it's, that's the decision fatigue, right? Like, because
correct.
You're having to get all these plates spun up from you and, people don't want to ask for forgiveness. They want to be given permission. Right. And so you do have to do a bit of that, like, do your best with this. There is going to be like, you're going to make mistakes and that's okay. We just need to go fast.
Yes.
Is what it is, and I think also just giving your team some permission to, in parameters, right. Be able to make some mistakes. And it's like, yeah, you're not going to get in trouble for this. This is just the nature of going fast, is that we're going to have some little things that break from time to time and that's okay. So it's, So for people who are interested, I'm going to post nearby in the show notes where to get in touch with Kristin, like including your LinkedIn, things like that, if people want to reach out to check you out. But I want to thank you for coming on the show. Any final thoughts before we sign off? Anything we didn't hit that you think the advisors need to hear?
I think what the advisors need to hear is they need to remember that they are leaders, whether they identify as one or not. They are leading their clients, right? They're leading their clients. They're leading their team members. They're leading their firm. And so it's really important that they dedicate the time to grow as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, inaction is still inaction, inaction is still a decision. So, you can't use it as an excuse, but thank you so much for coming on, Kristin. This was a great conversation. Appreciate you taking the time.
Catherine, I appreciate you having me. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for listening to the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast, again, sponsored by Dominion Enterprise Services. If you found this episode valuable, I would love to personally hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I'm always interested in your feedback, future episode ideas, or questions you'd like to see covered in a future episode of the show. And be sure to subscribe to our monthly tax update newsletter, where we share timely tax insights and planning considerations specifically crafted for advisory firm owners and what we share to our own clients. We'll see you next time.